All right, so I've been thinking about this on my own quite a lot because I've been playing Redfall, and I've got to the conclusion, and I think I know enough about the game to tell you, I think, why Weirdfall it's badly reviewed, basically, and why people don't like it. I mean, I do have to say that I have been enjoying my time with it, but I am going to stop playing it now because I don't feel necessarily compelled to play it more. And I've been thinking about this a lot, so I just thought I'd make a video kind of explaining my ideas as to why I think the design of that game is just so weird. It's so unexpected, I think, especially from a AAA studio. Anyway, so let's start with it. I mean, the first thing that you can realize when playing Redfall is the way the story and the missions are structured makes it so that the open world pretty much doesn't make sense. There's no reason for it to be an open world. Let me preface as well to actually when they first started talking about the game. They obviously focused on the fact that it was a co-op game, and they showed a lot of images of like the different characters working together for enemies and so on. The first thought that everyone had was that it was a game with vampires in similar way to Left 4 Dead, right? And the first thing that the developers came back with is say, actually, no, it's not. It's not like a Left 4 Dead because it's an open world, because I don't think they gave any other reason, because honestly, there isn't any. But for me, still, it doesn't make sense that it is the way that it is. There's no point for it to be an open world. So the way that missions are designed is basically you start from a hub. At the beginning is like the fire department station, I guess. And you take a mission, and that mission you have to go to a specific location and do something specific. Either pick up something, or kill someone, or I don't know, something. It's usually like a singular thing. It's rarely like multiple steps. It is sometimes, which could maybe justify the open worldness of it, but it happens so little that it almost doesn't justify. Plus, even if you didn't do an open world, you could make it like a decently big map, regardless of not being in. So you know. But anyway, so going back to the structure of the story, you pick up that mission, you go to that location, and you do that mission, and then you go back to the hub, pick up a different mission, do it, go back to the hub, pick up a different mission, do it, go back to the hub, and so on, so on. It's always the exact same structure, right? And now, through my playthrough, one of the reasons I think I'm not necessarily going to play anymore is I've got to the second map. And now it's basically the exact same, but now you're in a different map and with a slightly different story, right? So first of all, it almost feels like the previous story was pointless. Like this almost doesn't seem like there's a continuation in the story. Like maybe I've missed elements. Like there's probably, gameplay-wise, it doesn't feel like there's any continuation. It's just a different map, new location. You have to do the exact same, structure of missions in order to finish the second map, and that's basically it. And maybe then there's a third map, which is the exact same thing. So I don't know, but yeah. And to kind of illustrate this, at the beginning of the game, I would basically, like I would in any RPG, like Fallout, Skyrim, Oblivion, any of those, I would basically take a mission and walk to the locations, right? And as I played, I slowly realized that there's no point in doing that. Although there are some collectibles and stuff that may improve slightly your character, scattered around the open world. It's mostly fluff, you know? And you end up just, even which is actually funny, because at first I wouldn't use it at all. But whenever you finish a mission, there's straight away a button at the end of the mission that tells you, well, press this button and teleport back to the hub. And then you can do it again. And it makes a lot of sense seeing how the missions are structured, because that's basically why I ended up doing it. And when I actually started enjoying the game slightly more, when I realized that there was no point to the open world, and just fast travel. Just do that, just fast travel. Pick up the mission, fast travel to the closest point where the objective is, do the objective, and on the mission end screen, just use the option to teleport back to the hub. So for me, that begs the question is, why is it an open world? And I feel like there's no reason for it whatsoever. It could be an instance game like Left 4 Dead, which, by the way, I think it would resonate a lot more with players as well. People would recognize that it is this kind of game. And that's basically it. You have a hub, you join in with your friends, you decide on a mission you want to do. It teleports you to like a decently big map for that mission, designed specifically for that mission. You do that mission, you finish the mission, you teleport back to the hub, you've gained XP, now you can improve your characters or whatever, and you do the next mission, right? It wouldn't feel as bad whenever you join players which are not as far in the campaign, for example, as you are or whatever, because you're just going to go there and do missions regardless. It doesn't really matter. Like, sure, it would be nice to continue progressing together, but even if you don't, it wouldn't feel as bad. And the way that it is right now, it just suddenly, it just like an open world which is behind where you are. It feels a bit weird. And the same thing goes with the way that the leveling works. Like, everything's scaled always, right? At the beginning of the game, we are given giving the most basic handgun, right? And the first enemies you encounter, some humans, and you kill them in 2 to 3 hits, and 1 hit if you hit them in the head, right? And I'm now level 14, 15, and with like a basic gun, the exact same thing happens, right? So there is no, in terms of like gun power, whatever, even though the first gun that you're given deals, I don't know, 30 damage. I don't exactly know the number, maybe even lower than that. And the guns that I have now have like 300, 400 damage. It still takes the same amount of bullets to kill them. So it feels almost like the only progression that you have from the character, and the only way that your character becomes stronger and that you feel stronger in a way, is from the perks, basically, from the skills and the perks. So whenever you get skills, you get skill points, you spend them on perks, and those perks will have additional effects. For example, it'll make your abilities last longer, or they'll make your abilities deal damage when they didn't deal damage before, or they're just more effective, longer range, or whatever. For example, I'm playing with the sniper rifle guy. The sniper rifle, for example, you can get the ultimate to now, basically auto-aim to all the targets, each one after the other, whenever you kill one. And it also heals you or stuff like that, right? So you become stronger because you can now use that ability as a healing ability, as well as a high damage dealing ability, right? But yeah, so it almost feels like the level of the gun is almost pointless. The only thing that it does, it forces you to keep switching weapons. That's basically what it does. Because everything's scaled, it just means that if you have been leveling up and you haven't changed weapon in a while, you're probably with a weapon that is a couple of levels behind you, or like 3 or 4 levels behind you. And even if it's legendary, even if it's rare, even if it has all these extra effects, it's probably more worth it to switch to a common level weapon of the same level that you are, just because of the pure damage increase, than staying with like a legendary weapon, which makes it kind of, I don't know, pointless to some extent. But yeah, so for me, and the last thing that actually really, really bothered me. So I reached the second map, and that's when I realized that the structure of the second map is pretty much the same as the first one, which means it's basically a repetition of the same thing. And because there's no big cinematics or interesting, the storylines themselves are not incredibly interesting, it will feel like the mission structure would be pretty much the same, and it would feel like a repeat, pretty much. So at that point, I was kind of getting tired, started having this feeling of like, I'm pretty much gonna leave it here. So I decided, well, why not? I'm gonna try a different character. And what happens? It turns out, if you try a different character, you start from scratch again. There's no way to keep going on your campaign with a different character, which it's so stupid. As a player who has been mostly playing it, well, mostly no, I have just been playing it on my own, even though I would be interested in playing with people. Like, I feel like then what's the point of the other characters? What's the point of having 4 characters if for each character I have to just replay the whole game? Like, I'm not gonna play your game 4 times. I'm sorry. Even if I love your game, there's barely any game that I've played twice. let alone 4 times. And like, if I have to do that to experience all of the characters, like, what's the point? It feels extremely weird. So all of these basically takes me to think as to why isn't the game structured like a Left 4 Dead? Why isn't the game a game where you have your hub, where you join with your friends, and then you just teleport you to an instance location, an instance map, for specifically the mission that you've selected, that, you know, you finish the mission. Once you finish the mission, you go back to the hub, and you keep all of the weapons or the stuff that you might have looted and stuff, and at that point, you gain levels. And the way that I would do it, personally, is I would, instead of having levels be based on, like, being stuck per character, I would just have, like, a quote-unquote account level that gets leveled up, and then that leveling up that account level would give you perk points, and then you would be able to assign those perk points to any character you want. So that way, first of all, if you focus on only one character, then you'll be able to level up that character very, very fast. You'll get all the perk points, because anyways, that is the only thing that feels that kind of levels up a character anyways, because everything's leveled, everything's scaled anyways. And it wouldn't feel as bad to play with friends, because then you would just join in, and the objective would be simply be doing a mission. You don't necessarily care as much. If you can progress, that's an additional bonus. But whenever you played Left 4 Dead, that's what you did. You didn't really care which mission you were doing. You were just like, whoever was the host of the game maybe had an objective in mind, as, oh, we'll probably progress the missions or whatever. But once you finish the story, for example, you're just there to have fun with friends. You don't care about the actual progression of the story. And it would feel the same with that. Even like, it goes without mentioning the fact that there is these kind of dungeons as well that I didn't mention, which are literally procedurally generated dungeons that have some modifiers, random modifiers, whatever you get into, that feel completely arbitrary in the open world. Like, so whenever, at a certain point in the beginning of the game, there is these, they tell you, oh, now there is these kind of doors that teleport you to this literal instance dungeon that appear all over the map. And if you don't take care of them, there is like a bubble that grows, and it basically makes vampires inside of that bubble stronger, right? So sure, but like, I've done a couple of those, and I felt like the only purpose of those dungeons is basically a little challenge, and you get loot out of it. But because the loot that you get becomes obsolete so fast, especially when you're leveling up, there is no point, there's no reason as to why you would do that and get loot if once you level up a couple of times, it's not going to be useful anymore, because you'll just change to a common one of your level. It's going to be better than the legendary that you looted. So those dungeons ended up being just a hassle. Like, I would completely ignore them up to the point where the bubble was so big that it was in between, like, where the actual missions were inside of that bubble. The missions that I had to do to progress the story started being inside of the actual bubble, and at that point, in my head, I was like, well, I can do the mission, but there's probably going to be a boss in there, and I'd rather not do the boss inside of the bubble, because it's probably going to do it a lot harder. So I would rather just get rid of this bubble thing, just force myself to finish with this bubble thing, and then I'll do my mission a lot easier, because I don't have to deal with improved vampires, I guess. So again, that simple concept would work so much better as an instance thing, and you wouldn't have to add any of that thing that increases or improves vampires. You would just simply have that as a type of mission, as a replayable type of mission in somewhat procedural dungeons that you do for loot. And that's how I would, and that's the thing, I would change how the loot works. I would remove the levels of the loot, because there's no point in it. Which is, I mean, I would remove the levels of the characters to begin with. It would purely be perk-wise. And no levels to the characters either. So it would also allow you to switch between characters easily. So the game would be fully instance, meaning that you can start with the hub, You teleport to a mission, you do that mission, you go back, you get levels, you get account levels, which allow you to improve your characters, and you get loot from that. And the way that I would make loot, I would simply make it rarity based. Instead of making level based, I would make it rarity based. Meaning that the harder the dungeon, the harder the thing, the higher the chances that you get rarer weapons. And it would become more of a looter shooter from the start. And the only important thing would be trying to get a higher rarity item. And the thing that I would also do is I would add tiers inside of each rarity. So I would have inside of the common, you would have from tier 1 to tier 10, for example, being tier 10 the max level, whatever. And as you unlock better dungeons, better missions, better story missions, and better stuff like that, you would increase the higher difficulty those missions are, the more likely you are to get like a higher tier, higher rarity type of weapons. And that's it. And you would keep them once you finish the mission. You would have like a limited inventory that you could bring back. And then you would have your stash in the hub, and then you would be and then the other thing I would do actually is that when you go into the missions, I would limit your loadout to the 3 weapons that you are equipped with. So instead of always having, because what you end up having in Redfall is you always have all of the types of weapons on you. There's no reason not to. Like you're eventually run out of ammo of a certain weapon, you just switch to a different one, and you'll end up finding them. There's no real thought behind it. At least for me, there was no real thought behind which weapons I would use at a certain point, because I always had them on me constantly, all the types of weapons. And what I would do is every once in a while I would just choose which ones I liked for each type and remove all the others, and that was basically it. So yeah, it just feels so that would add an extra layer of importance to the loadout that you bring with. It's just like choose 3 weapons that you want out of the, I think, 7 types of weapons that there is, and it would make it a lot more important, and it would make a lot of interesting choices also with other characters. Because of course, if someone in your team is using an UV light weapon, for those of you who don't know the game, is because you're against vampires, you use a UV light weapon, which is basically a torch, and that basically turns the vampires into stone, and then you can punch them and destroy them, and that's it. You don't have to actually shoot them or hit them with a stake or anything. I think it's a good mechanic, but yeah. So basically, as long as one of you in your team has that kind of weapon, you don't need all of you to have it, or you could all have it, that's fine. But it would make other meaningful choices also with what other people in your team bring. So you would go together, think together, and okay, I'll bring this, you'll bring that, etc., etc. And I think it would make it a lot more fun. So yeah, I think that would make the game make a lot more sense. And the way that the game loop then would work is just you are in the hub. It would work the exact same way that it worked right now. It just wouldn't be in an open world, and it doesn't matter. Like, it wouldn't change anything. You would be in a hub. You would choose the mission you want to do, which you would always have the previous story missions, and as you do the story missions, you will unlock newer story missions. And then you would always have those like procedurally generated dungeons. The way that I would do them is I would make them so that they're more customizable, in the sense that you can choose the difficulty you want to do, and based on that difficulty, it would give you it would increase the range of loot that you could get, for example. And that would basically it. And then the gameplay loop would simply be, you are in the hub, you choose the mission you want to do, you do the mission, you come back, you level up your characters, you probably have better weapons now, and then you choose another mission, and so on, you do, and at some point, the story missions might scale up pretty fast in terms of how the difficulty of it. So at some point, you might be trying a story mission which is a little bit too hard for you, purely, by the way, again, based on the perks of your character and based on the weapon rarity and tier, nothing to do with level. And at that point, you would just decide, okay, well, I'll do a couple of dungeons for the loot, purely for the loot. Like, you get into that grind mode of redoing dungeons for the loot. The same that would work in a lot of other games, like Diablo and Destiny and stuff like that. And once you have good loot, better loot than you have, you can try again the story mission, and so on. And I think it would make a lot more sense. I just feel, I mean, in a simple way to say it, there's so many weird design choices that went into Redfall, and doing it in an open world just makes no sense to me. There's no reason for it whatsoever. It's a lot more work for the developers to handcraft the world than to handcraft, and it would give them so much more control to the missions as well. Because the way that it is right now, the mission, whatever mission you're doing, will happen in a specific house, let's say, in that open world. But what is happening around it, the developers don't have that much control over, right? Because it's just simple encounters, and that's as far it goes, right? But if the missions were instanced, the path to that house, let's say, could be a lot more tailored to that mission and to whatever you're doing on that mission. And it would, I think, in my opinion, would give a lot more freedom to developers to actually make a interesting mission. And again, a lot of people are afraid when people talk about instanced stuff like that, because they assume the map is going to be very small, very linear, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a decently big map and still allow, for example, missions where you have to interact with a couple of satellite dishes in order to get pinpoint a location, like triangulate a location, and then have a third location where you actually finish the mission. All of that in a decently big space, you know? I think they should have done it that way, and the way that the game is right now doesn't make sense and is very weird. So it's not that the game is bad. Again, I've enjoyed my time with it. The procedural generated dungeons are somewhat enjoyable. The missions themselves, whenever you're inside of like the location of the mission, it's fun. It's actually quite fun. The combat is fun. But the way that everything's structured doesn't make sense, and there's no need for it to be in an open world. And if only they accepted that and made it an instanced game the way that it should be, the game would be a lot more what people expected, and it would just be more enjoyable. And again, what people it just doesn't make sense if you're trying to sell a game. So this is an advice that I would give any developer. If you're trying to sell your game, and every person that you talk to, and the majority of people that you talk to, come back to you telling you a game that is not what you expect, as in a reference that is not the type of game that you're going for. In this example, for example, they marketed the game, they made the trailers and so on, and what everyone saw is it was a Left 4 Dead-like game, but with a different story, made by Arcane, with different characters, with like abilities and stuff instead of just shooty, and with vampires, right? That's what people thought, and that's when they were forced to say, no, people, it's not. It's an open world game. It's like that. And when you get to a point where you have to reiterate and further explain what the game is, and people don't really understand it until the game really releases, there's something wrong there. There has to be something wrong in that design. If you cannot explain what the game is easily and people understand what the type of game is from the beginning, there's something wrong. And now talking also about the Arcane, another example is Deathloop. I think in my opinion, what happened with Deathloop is that the same thing happened, not similarly in the sense that when they started marketing the game and they were showing trailers of it, no one could tell you what type of game it would be and how the game would be. It was impossible to know. Like, it was so cryptic and so weird of a concept that no one knew what the game really was. And it wasn't until I actually played it that I understood how the game worked. And well, in the end, I actually didn't enjoy it too much because it felt like work, but that's like a different topic in and of itself. But again, for me, that was also a sign of there's something wrong there, right? As another anecdote, I remember going to playtest a game on an unnamed a company that I will not name and a game that I will not name. I went to playtest it, and after we played it, they gave us a questionnaire that we had to fill in. And one of the questions was, what type of game does this game remind you of? Or what other games would you compare this game to? And pretty much everyone would answer a specific game. And as soon as we gave in the questionnaires, the developers came to us and were unhappy because they didn't want people to compare those two games together. Because what they were saying is that they were aiming for a different type of experience, and therefore comparing those two games would mean that they were not actually getting to the experience that they hoped for. And yeah, I when talking with the developers and so on, they didn't seem like they had much intention of changing anything there, even knowing that everyone would associate their game to this other game, that it wasn't the game that they wanted to be associated with. They didn't seem to have any intention or means to actually change the game. And from that point, when talking to my friends and so on about the other people that we play tested the game with, we all got to the conclusion that that game would flop, because if you can't get the point across of what kind of game it is, and yeah, it's not it means there's something wrong. It means that conceptually there is something wrong. And I think there was a big sign of that with RedFall, and they didn't listen, and it turned out to be, you know, a flop basically. I mean, the numbers apparently are not that bad, mostly because of Game Pass. I mean, again, I would not have played the game if I didn't have the Game Pass. But yeah, it's a pity, because I think if the game was structured differently, the game could be quite decent, a very good experience. But sadly, it's not. So yeah, anyways, enough about this. Quite a decent rant about RedFall. And yeah, sadly, I am going to say that unless I have friends who kind of want to play with me. But again, it's so annoying, because now I'm high level, and if I've convinced friends to play with me, they would be low level, and it would feel weird. I would probably have to be the one playing with them, but then it would feel too easy for me, and it would still be like a repetition of everything I've already done. Which, yeah, so I will end up not playing the game anymore, sadly. I think it's a big flop of the game, which I hope the developers learned a lot from their mistake, and hopefully they can improve on it in their future games. And yeah, I mean, I love the concept of the games of Arcane in general, so hopefully they can do better next time. So yeah, anyways, thanks for watching, and see you next time.